It fits seamlessly into your daily routine, whether you're eating, studying, driving, hitting the gym, or just killing time. If you want to think deeper, question more, and actually understand the world, subscribe to the History Trending podcast.
I want you to just close your eyes for a second and really imagine this scene. The year is 48 BCE. You're standing right there on the shores of the Mediterranean. You can feel that warm coastal breeze, but it carries something else with it.
The smoke.
Exactly, this sharp, unmistakable scent of salt mixed with burning timber. And you look out toward the harbor of Alexandria, and the water is just reflecting this massive, raging inferno.
Yeah, it's a terrifying visual.
It really is. Flames are licking the wooden docks, they're spreading relentlessly into the city, and drifting up into the Egyptian sky is, the ash of countless papyrus scrolls.
Right. It is an incredibly evocative image, like the ultimate intellectual apocalypse.
And we all picture this, right? This massive, dramatic end to the ancient world. It's the popular image we all have of the greatest intellectual catastrophe in human history.
Yeah, the moment a single tragic fire supposedly plunged humanity straight into the Dark Ages.
Robbing us of centuries of progress and a potential technological revolution. I mean, imagine if all the servers hosting the internet were located in one single building and someone just walked up and dropped a match.
That is exactly how we're taught to view this event.
But what if I told you the Great Library didn't die in a blaze of glory? What if it died of something far more terrifying to us today, which is budget cuts and bureaucratic apathy?
That is the ultimate twist of this history, honestly.
Yeah.
We want a cataclysm because a cataclysm is, well, it's easy to understand.
Yeah, it's a clear story.
Right. It's a comforting thought, in a strange way, to have a single dramatic event to blame.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality of what happened at the Great Library of Alexandria is much more complex, slightly contrarian, and, if we're being totally honest, arguably more tragic than the Hollywood myth.
So let's unpack this, because our mission for this deep dive is to completely dismantle this dramatic fable. We're going to guide you through a massive stack of sources.
Historical accounts, documentaries, academic texts, the works.
Right, to uncover the real story. And let me tell you, what we found completely changed how I look at history and how I look at the fragile nature of information today. Let's start with the myths.
The big three.
Yeah, because we've been sold 3 distinct cinematic endings to this library, separated by hundreds of years. The first one is the fire I just described, Julius Caesar in 48 BCE.
The Caesar narrative is definitely the most pervasive. And the historical context here is the Alexandrian War. Caesar was trapped in Alexandria, backing Cleopatra in a civil war against her brother Ptolemy III.
And he was basically cornered, right?
Yeah, heavily outnumbered and besieged right in the royal quarter. So, to secure his position and prevent his enemies from using the harbor against him, he ordered his own fleet to be burned.
Which is a bold military move.
It is. And the story goes that this fire spread from the docks into the city, consuming the Great Library in one cataclysmic blaze.
See, I always struggle with the logistics of this story, because Alexandria was a massive stone-built metropolis.
Right, it wasn't made of kindling.
Exactly. How does a fire on ships out in the water jump to land and miraculously seek out the one building holding all of human knowledge?
That skepticism is entirely warranted, and modern historical consensus actually backs you up on that. We really have to look at accounts from writers like Strabo.
He was a geographer, right?
Yes, a geographer who visited Alexandria just a few decades after Caesar's death. Strabo toured the city, walked the royal quarter, and wrote extensively about the active functioning research institutions that were still there.
Oh, wow. So they were still up and running.
Fully operational.
Yeah.
Yes, Caesar started a fire, and yes, the wind carried embers to the docks, but the flames likely only hit coastal warehouses.
Okay, so warehouses that held grain, supplies, and maybe some books.
Exactly that. Alexandria was a major shipping hub. There were undoubtedly scrolls in those warehouses waiting for transit or sorting. So Caesar may have accidentally destroyed a significant number of books.
But not the library itself.
No, he did not destroy the main library complex itself. The most compelling proof we have of this is a massive geopolitical gift that happened just a generation later. Mark Antony famously gifted Cleopatra 200,000 scrolls.
From the rival library of Pergamon, right? Specifically to add to Alexandria's collection.
You got it.
I mean, you don't give 200,000 books to a library that no longer exists. Where would she even put them?
Right. The institution was still functioning, the buildings are still standing, and the collection was still being actively managed. Caesar's fire was a localized tragedy, not an intellectual extinction event.
Okay, so if Caesar only burned the docks, my mind immediately goes to the religious purges I've read about. We always hear about the Christians burning pagan temples, which brings us to the second suspect in this historical whodunit.
Right, shifting forward to the late 4th and early 5th centuries, specifically around 391 and 415 CE.
This narrative focuses heavily on Theophilus, the bishop of Alexandria, right, who oversaw the destruction of a massive complex called the Serapeum in 391 CE.
It does, and the Serapeum is an important piece of this puzzle.
The Serapeum is often described as like a daughter library, right? An offshoot of the main one.
It was primarily a temple to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis, but it did historically house a portion of the library's overflow collection. Because of this, the destruction of the Serapeum is often framed as a coordinated Christian assault on global knowledge.
Right.
And this myth also frequently loops in the horrific murder of Hypatia in 415 CE.
I want to spend a second on Hypatia because she is just such an incredible figure. She was a brilliant mathematician, a philosopher, and essentially the head of the Neoplatonic school in Alexandria.
She was arguably the leading intellectual of her time.
Yeah, and her death is incredibly gruesome. She was dragged through the streets and murdered by a Christian mob. In popular culture, her death is almost always linked to her trying to defend the library's scrolls from religious zealots.
It makes for a compelling, tragic narrative, for sure.
Yeah.
But it fundamentally misrepresents the geopolitics of 5th century Alexandria. Hypatia was murdered due to an incredibly vicious political feud.
Between who?
Between Orestes, who was the Roman governor of Alexandria, and Cyril, the bishop of Alexandria. Hypatia was an advisor to Orestes, and she basically became a scapegoat for the mob.
That is just awful.
It was a profound tragedy and a complete stain on the era. But, and this is crucial, there is zero historical evidence linking her death to the physical destruction of the library itself. She wasn't standing in front of a bookcase holding off men with torches.
And as for the Serapeum, if Theophilus tore down the temple in 391 CE, wasn't he destroying the daughter library?
Well, here's the critical piece of context. By the time Theophilus dismantled the Serapeum, the golden age of the library was long, long gone. If we look at the contemporary sources who actually wrote about the books in the Serapeum during that era, they all speak of the collection in the past tense.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The shelves may have been there, but the scrolls were largely gone. The destruction was about eradicating a pagan temple to assert religious dominance, not a targeted strike on a functioning repository of science and literature.
So the library, as a grand institution, had already faded into obscurity by then.
Exactly.
Which perfectly sets up the third big myth. And honestly, this one feels like something straight out of a historical fiction novel. It's almost too perfectly written.
Because it is a complete fabrication. The third myth places the blame on the Muslim conquest of Egypt in 640 or 641 CE.
Right, the legend claims that the Muslim ruler, Caliph Omar, was asked what to do with the library's vast collection, and he allegedly replied with this perfect, unassailable piece of circular logic.
Right, he supposedly said, if these books agree with the Quran, they are superfluous. If they contradict the Quran, they are heresy. Therefore, destroy them.
It's such a sticky quote,
Yeah.
and the visual the story gives us is just horrifying, that the scrolls were hauled away and used as tinder to heat the public bathhouses of Alexandria. And there were so many scrolls it took a full 6 months to burn them all.
It's vivid, but the sources we dug into tear this apart completely.
Yeah, explain that.
The timeline of this story is its ultimate undoing. This anecdote first appeared in the 13th century in the writings of a Christian bishop named Gregory Bar Hebraeus.
Wait, the 13th century? That is 600 years after the Muslim conquest of Egypt.
Yep.
That's like someone today inventing a story about Joan of Arc and claiming it as primary evidence.
Precisely. To understand why this myth was invented, we really have to look at the geopolitics of the 13th century. This was the era of the Crusades.
Oh, so it's propaganda.
Exactly. There was a massive ideological incentive for Christian writers to paint Islamic conquerors as anti-intellectual barbarians who destroyed classical wisdom. It was purely wartime propaganda.
When the reality was very different, right?
Completely different. Early Muslim scholars had a profound respect for Greek philosophy, mathematics, and medicine. They weren't shoveling these texts into furnaces, they were actively seeking them out to preserve and translate them.
Wow.
Furthermore, by 640 CE, there is absolutely no archaeological or historical evidence that the Great Library, or even the buildings that once housed it, still existed in any recognizable form in Alexandria.
I am fascinated by what the survival of these three myths says about human psychology. If Caesar, the Christian mob, and the Muslim conquest are all mostly fake or wildly distorted in relation to the library, why do we keep repeating them?
It speaks to our deep craving for narrative simplicity. We want a clear villain. We want to be able to point a finger at a specific military commander or a rival religious group and say, they did this, they are the reason we don't have flying cars.
Right, because the alternative is terrifying. It's so much easier to blame a bad guy with a torch than to face the mundane, creeping reality of institutional decay.
Absolutely.
A fire is a singular event you can mourn. Decay is a mirror. It forces us to realize that human knowledge doesn't usually explode, it just slowly crumbles when a society stops caring about it or, stops funding it.
To truly understand how it crumbled, we really have to understand how it was built. We have to look at the rise of the library, the mechanics of its golden age, and then its long, slow fade.
Okay, let's go back to the very beginning. Alexander the Great founded the city in 331 BCE. He laid it out with this incredible vision, a grid system right on the Mediterranean, designed to catch the cooling sea breezes.
It was a marvel of urban planning.
But Alexander was a conqueror. He didn't stick around to build a library. That task fell to his general, Ptolemy Auceter, who took control of Egypt after Alexander died.
Right, and Ptolemy Auceter made Alexandria the capital of Hellenistic Egypt. We have to remember that Ptolemy wasn't just a military man. He was a scholar in his own right.
He actually wrote an authoritative history of Alexander's campaigns, didn't he?
He did, a highly regarded one. He and the Ptolemaic kings who succeeded him had a massive chip on their shoulder. They wanted to build a city of wonders that would rival and ultimately eclipse Athens as the intellectual and cultural center of the world.
And Alexandria was astonishing. We're talking about a city with a massive lighthouse, the Pharos, which was one of the wonders of the ancient world.
Unbelievable architecture.
It had automatic doors in its temples, which we will definitely get to later because the engineering is wild. It had coin-operated slot machines that dispensed holy water. It had a robust international banking system.
It was an ancient metropolis, entirely engineered to project power and sophistication. But the crown jewel of this city wasn't just a building with bookshelves. Our sources make it clear that the library was actually just one component of a much larger, sprawling research institution called the Mouseion.
The Mouseion, meaning the Temple of the Muses, which is obviously where we get the modern word museum.
Right.
But this wasn't a place where you just looked at old artifacts in glass spaces. I was reading about the structure of this place, and it sounded like an ancient, massively funded think tank.
The Ptolemies spared absolutely no expense. They created an environment specifically designed to attract the greatest, most innovative minds of the Hellenistic world.
Okay.
They recognized that intellectual capital was just as valuable as military might.
Let's talk about the perks, because they are insane. If you were an ancient scholar, a mathematician in Syracuse, or an astronomer in Rhodes, getting an invite to the Mouseion was like winning the lottery. The incentives were unbelievable.
Oh, they were a scholar's dream.
You got total tax exemptions, you were given free room and board in the royal quarter, you received a massive lifelong salary funded directly from the king's treasury.
They essentially removed all the practical burdens of life, so these scholars could do nothing but think.
Yeah, you would eat in communal dining halls with other brilliant people, fostering this incredible cross-pollination of ideas.
Exactly. You could stroll through beautifully landscaped botanical gardens. You had access to cutting-edge laboratories and astronomical observatories.
Or even a private exotic zoo attached to the institution, right?
There was, filled with animals from deep in Africa and Asia that no Greek had ever laid eyes on before.
It's the ancient equivalent of a Silicon Valley megacampus, complete with the free gourmet cafeterias and the sprawling green spaces.
That's a spot-on comparison.
But to fuel this think tank, the Ptolemies needed data. They needed texts. And their approach to acquiring these texts was nothing short of maniacal. Their stated goal wasn't just to have a good collection. Their goal was to possess a copy of literally every book in the world.
They were completely ruthless about it. They didn't just send polite requests to other cities. They utilized the full, aggressive power of the state.
The ship confiscations are what blew my mind. Let's break down the logistics of this. If you were a merchant ship sailing the Mediterranean and you pulled into Alexandria's harbor to trade grain or wine, you were immediately boarded by royal guards.
And they weren't just looking for contraband or weapons.
No.
They were looking for scrolls.
Yeah.
The guards would systematically search the ship, and if they found any text, whether it was a ship's log, a work of poetry, or a philosophical treatise, they confiscated them.
Just took them.
The scrolls were marched directly to the library. There, Teams of highly trained scribes would painstakingly copy the text. And then, this is the brilliantly ruthless part, the library would keep the original scroll and return the freshly made copy to the ship's owner.
The audacity is just staggering. You dock your ship, the government steals your rare original manuscript, hands you a replica, and tells you to be on your way.
It really is unbelievable.
These confiscated texts actually had a specific categorization in the library's catalog, right? They were labeled from the ships.
Yes, they were categorized by exactly how they were stolen.
But it gets even bolder. We have to talk about the Athenian heist.
Oh, the Athenian heist perfectly encapsulates the Ptolemaic obsession with original sources. Ptolemy III wanted the official, authoritative manuscripts of the three greatest Greek playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides.
These weren't just popular plays. These were the crown jewels of Athenian culture. They were considered sacred state treasures, kept under lock and key in Athens.
Exactly. Athens, understandably, refused to sell them at any price. So Ptolemy III proposed a diplomatic compromise. He sent an envoy to Athens, asking to merely borrow the original scrolls for a short time, so his scholars could make perfectly accurate copies for the Alexandria library.
And to prove his good faith, he offered a massive collateral deposit, right?
Who did? He offered 15 talents.
Let's put that in perspective for you listening. According to the economic conversions in our sources, 15 talents of silver is roughly the equivalent of $15 million today. He offered a $15 million deposit just to rent some books.
Athens, seeing this astronomical sum of money and believing that no one would be foolish enough to forfeit that kind of wealth, finally agrees. They send the priceless original state-sanctioned scrolls across the Mediterranean to Alexandria.
I can already see where this is going.
Ptolemy III receives them. He has his master scribes copy the plays onto the absolute highest quality Egyptian papyrus. And then, well, he just keeps the originals.
He boxes up the copies, puts them on a ship back to Athens, and cheerfully sends a message essentially saying, keep the $15 million, we're keeping the books.
He forfeited the deposit without a second thought. To the Ptolemies, the cultural capital and the prestige of owning the authentic original texts vastly outweighed the financial cost.
It was a power move.
Total power move, signaling to the entire Mediterranean that Alexandria was the true center of Greek culture, not Athens.
It is state-sponsored piracy backed by a bottomless royal treasury. And they didn't just target individuals or rival cities, they engaged in full-blown economic warfare against rival libraries. The Library of Pergamon was their biggest competitor, right?
Yes. The Attalid kings of Pergamon, located in modern-day Turkey, were aggressively trying to build their own universal library to challenge Alexandria's supremacy. They were trying to poach scholars and amass their own massive collection.
So what did Alexandria do?
To sabotage them, Ptolemy implemented an incredibly aggressive, targeted trade policy. He placed a complete embargo on the export of Egyptian papyrus to Pergamon.
Which is a massive deal, because papyrus was the premier writing material of the ancient world. It was lightweight, easy to roll, and Egypt had a total geographical monopoly on the papyrus reed.
Ptolemy's logic was simple and brutal. If Pergamon doesn't have papyrus, they can't copy books. If they can't copy books, their library fails. It was an ancient supply chain blockade.
But it completely backfired in the most spectacular way.
It really did, because necessity is the mother of invention. Cut off from the Egyptian papyrus supply, the scholars and craftsmen of Pergamon were forced to innovate. They developed a new, significantly more durable writing material made from treated animal skins, usually calf, goat, or sheep.
Oh, wow.
The process involved soaking the skins in lime, scraping away the hair and flesh, and then stretching it incredibly tight on a wooden frame to dry.
And the resulting material was called pergamena, named after the city of Pergamon itself, which over centuries evolved into the English word we use today, which is parchment.
The Ptolemies were so petty and so desperate to maintain their monopoly on knowledge that their economic warfare accidentally forced the invention of parchment.
A material that would ultimately outlast papyrus entirely.
Exactly, and become the standard medium for preserving texts for the next 1,000 years.
That is wild. The hubris is just incredible. But this leads us to the real turning point of the deep dive. Because if the library survived Caesar's dockfire, and it survived the Christian mobs in the 5th century, and it survived the Muslim conquests, what actually killed it? When did the music start for this incredible institution?
This is where we have to shift our perspective. The true death knell of the Great Library wasn't a sudden fire. It was a bureaucratic purge. The turning point, the moment the intellectual heart of the city was ripped out, was the year 145 BCE.
145 BCE, the era of Ptolemy VIII. Okay, set the political scene for us. How does a government destroy its own greatest asset?
By the time we reach 145 BCE, the Ptolemaic dynasty had become incredibly unstable. The early Ptolemies were scholars and visionaries, but their successors were increasingly plagued by internal power struggles, corruption, and brutal civil wars.
Right.
Ptolemy VIII, who's known by the rather unflattering nickname Physcon, which translates roughly to fatty or potbelly, was engaged in a vicious dynastic conflict with his own brother, Ptolemy VI, and later his sister.
It's basically Game of Thrones in Egypt.
That's a very accurate way to put it. And during this turbulent period, many of the prominent, brilliant scholars living in luxury at the Mouseion made a fatal political miscalculation. They backed the wrong sibling. They openly supported Ptolemy VIII's rivals.
Oh no, you don't want to bet against the guy who eventually takes the throne.
Definitely not. When Ptolemy VIII finally secured absolute power in 145 BCE, his retaliation was utterly ruthless. He didn't just execute his immediate political rivals, he purged the city's intellectual elite. He banished all foreign scholars from Alexandria.
Wait, he just kicked them out. The brightest minds in the world, the people the city had spent centuries attracting.
He expelled them. He entirely withdrew the royal patronage that had sustained the library and the Mouseion.
The massive salaries.
Gone.
The free meals in the banquet halls.
Canceled. The research grants and tax exemptions. Revoked overnight. And to add profound insult to injury, he appointed a palace military guard, a man named Cetus, who was literally a spearman with absolutely no scholarly backgrounds whatsoever, as the new head librarian.
It is the ultimate anti-intellectual flex. You take the most prestigious academic post in the ancient world and give it to a palace thug just to humiliate the institution.
It was a clear message. Political loyalty is now the only currency that matters in Alexandria. Intellectual independence is a threat.
Let's bring back that Silicon Valley startup analogy because the parallels are chilling. The library didn't die by assassination, it died of starvation. Imagine that massively funded tech campus. They've got the brightest engineers in the world working on breakthrough AI. And then a hostile takeover happens. The new CEO views the engineering team as a political threat. The venture capital dries up immediately.
Exactly.
They fire all the senior developers, cut the server maintenance budget to zero, and they put the head of building security in charge of the entire engineering division.
And you see, the servers don't explode. The glass buildings don't burn down.
Right. The physical infrastructure is totally fine, but the talent leaves. The hardware slowly degrades over the next decade because nobody is paying the maintenance bills or running the updates. The innovation just stops dead.
That is precisely what happened to the Mouseion. The physical destruction of the buildings happened slowly, over centuries, long after the intellectual life had been drained away.
It was a slow fade.
Alexandria suffered multiple devastating military sieges in the following centuries. In 272 CE, the Roman Emperor Aurelian aggressively attacked the city to put down a rebellion by Queen Zenobia of Palmyra, and the royal quarter where the library was located was heavily damaged in the fighting.
And then it happened again, right?
Yes, in 297 CE, Emperor Diocletian besieged the city again, leveling large sections of it.
It's a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts. By the time we get to those religious conflicts of the 4th and 5th centuries with Theophilus and Hypatia, the golden age of Alexandrian scholarship wasn't just over, it was a distant, mythical memory to the people living there.
Exactly.
The buildings may have still held some rotting, neglected scrolls, but the institution as a living, breathing engine of discovery was entirely dead.
It is a profound tragedy, primarily because of what was actually happening inside those walls before the Purge. Before we discuss how that knowledge survived, because crucially, a lot of it, we really need to truly understand what was being achieved during that golden age.
Yeah, we have to talk about the contents.
We're talking about a collection estimated to be anywhere from 40,000 to perhaps 700,000 individual papyrus scrolls.
I want to pause on that number. Up to 700,000 scrolls. How do you even begin to organize that without a computer database? If I walk in and say, I'm looking for a specific commentary on Homer's Iliad, how do they find it among 750,000 rolled up pieces of reed?
That monumental challenge fell to a scholar named Callimachus in the 3rd century BCE. He recognized that a library of that scale was completely useless if you couldn't locate the information. To solve this, he created a system called the Pinakes, which translates to the tablets.
And this wasn't just a simple alphabetized list of titles, was it?
Not at all. The Pinakes was a massive 120-volume catalog that served as the world's first true, comprehensive bibliographical system. It was essentially an ancient search engine algorithm.
That's incredible.
Callimachus didn't just list where a scroll was physically located, he created deep metadata. The Pinakes categorized works by genre rhetoric, law, epic poetry, medicine, mathematics. Within those genres, authors were alphabetized.
That's incredibly advanced for the time.
It goes deeper. For each author, Callimachus included a brief biography. He included the opening words of the text, so if a scroll was missing its title tag, you could still identify it by the first sentence.
Oh, that's smart.
He also provided the exact number of lines in the manuscript, which was a vital anti-fraud measure, so a buyer or copier would know if a section had been secretly deleted. He even included critical evaluations of the text's authenticity, noting if a work was genuinely deep by a specific author or a known forgery.
He literally invented cross-referencing and metadata ranking. It is heartbreaking that the Pinakes itself, the 120-volume index to the ancient world, is one of the great lost works of the library. We only know how brilliantly it functioned because so many other ancient writers referenced using it.
It provided the organizational framework that allowed the incredible science of Alexandria to happen. The scholars weren't wasting time searching for texts, they were building on them.
And the science. The science happening in this place is truly mind-bending. I want to walk through some of the heavy hitters because it proves how far ahead of their time they were. Let's start with Eratosthenes.
Eratosthenes was actually a head librarian at the Mouseion, and he achieved something staggering. Living in a time long before telescopes, satellites, or global navigation, he calculated the circumference of the Earth with shocking accuracy.
Okay, I need the mechanics on this. How do you measure the planet with ancient technology?
It relied on brilliant geometric deduction and basic observational tools. Eratosthenes had access to reports from travelers. He learned that on the summer solstice, at high noon, the sun shone directly down a deep vertical well in the southern Egyptian city of Syene, modern-day Aswan. The sun was directly overhead, so vertical objects cast absolutely no shadow.
Right, makes sense.
But Eratosthenes knew that on that exact same day, at that exact same time, in Alexandria, which was further north, a vertical rod planted in the ground did cast a shadow. Because he understood that the sun's rays arrive at Earth perfectly parallel, he deduced that the Earth's surface must be curved.
Oh, wow.
If the Earth were flat, both rods would cast the same shadow or no shadow at all.
So he uses the shadow to figure out the angle of the curve.
Precisely. He measured the angle of the shadow in Alexandria and found it was roughly 7.2 degrees, or about 150th of a full 360-degree circle. Therefore, he reasoned, the distance between Alexandria and Syene must be exactly 150th of the total circumference of the Earth.
That is incredibly elegant math. But how did he know the physical distance between the two cities?
He hired specialized walkers, men trained to walk in perfectly equal measured paces to physically pace out the distance across the Egyptian desert.
You're kidding.
No, they measured the distance at 5,000 stadia. Eratosthenes multiplied that by 50 and calculated the Earth's circumference to be 250,000 stadia, which he later refined to 252,000.
A stadium was the length of a Greek athletic stadium, right? So depending on exactly which stadium measurement he used, his calculation translates to roughly 39,000 to 46,000 kilometers. The actual circumference of the Earth is 40,075 kilometers.
He was astonishingly close.
He did this with a stick, a well, and pure deductive reasoning.
The level of empirical observation was unprecedented. And it wasn't just physical measurements. They were doing incredibly advanced abstract mathematics. Take Hipparchus, for example.
Hipparchus is mostly known as an astronomer, right? He mapped the stars.
He is considered the greatest astronomer of antiquity. But recent research into ancient texts revealed he was also operating at a mathematical level we didn't think existed back then. The Greek historian Plutarch casually mentioned a debate where Hipparchus proved that there are exactly 103,049 ways to intertwine 10 simple statements.
103,049 ways to intertwine 10 statements. What does that even mean?
For centuries, modern scholars thought Plutarch was just making up a random, impressively large number to make Hipparchus sound smart. But in 1994, mathematicians decided to actually look at that specific number. They realized Hipparchus had correctly calculated the 10th Schroeder number.
Okay, pretend I haven't taken a math class in a decade. What is a Schroeder number?
In the branch of mathematics called Combinatorics, Schroeder numbers describe the number of ways you can organize, group, or bracket a sequence of items. If you have 10 sequential variables in an equation and you want to know every single possible way you can put parentheses around them to group them differently, the answer is exactly 103,049.
So Hipparchus was doing highly complex combinatorics, a field of math crucial for modern computer science and probability, 2,000 years before we thought the field was even invented.
Yes, and he was doing it using the ancient Greek numerical system, which used letters for numbers and didn't even have a concept of zero. It is a staggering intellectual feat.
That is just wild.
There's also mounting evidence that Hipparchus developed a sophisticated mathematical theory of binocular vision millennia before Galileo or Kepler.
From abstract math, let's move to practical engineering. What about Heron of Alexandria? Because this is the invention that always stops me in my tracks. He invented a steam engine.
He did. Heron invented a device called the eolipile. It was a hollow sphere mounted on a boiler. As water was heated in the boiler below, steam was channeled up through pipes into the sphere. The steam then escaped through two L-shaped bent tubes protruding from the sides of the sphere.
Like a lawn sprinkler.
Exactly like a rotary sprinkler. The thrust of the escaping steam caused the sphere to spin incredibly rapidly. It was the world's first recorded steam engine, demonstrating the principles of jet propulsion and the conversion of thermal energy into mechanical energy.
And he didn't stop there.
Not at all. Heron was a master of mechanics. He invented a wind wheel to operate a mechanical organ. He invented complex pulley systems. He even invented the world's first vending machine for the temples.
Right, a vending machine.
Yes. Worshippers would drop a heavy coin into a slot at the top of a sealed jar. The coin would fall onto a delicate internal pan attached to a lever. The weight of the coin would push the lever down, opening a valve that dispensed a measured amount of holy water until the coin slid off the pan and the valve snapped shut.
It's an automated, weight-calibrated liquid dispenser in the ancient world. That is mind-blowing. Let's walk over to the medical wing of the Mouseion, because the anatomical discoveries are just as shocking. Tell us about Herophilus.
Herophilus is widely considered the father of anatomy, and he achieved this through a practice that was deeply taboo in almost the entire ancient world, the systematic scientific dissection of human cadavers.
How was he allowed to do that? The Greeks believed a body had to be properly buried or the soul couldn't rest. Touching a corpse was a massive religious pollution.
You are absolutely correct about mainland Greek culture. But Alexandria was different. The Ptolemaic kings, in their relentless pursuit of scientific supremacy, provided Herophilus with a protected environment where traditional Greek religious taboos were suspended. They supplied him with the bodies of condemned criminals.
I see.
There are even dark, controversial reports from later Roman historians that the Ptolemies allowed Herophilus to perform vivisections, dissecting criminals while they were still alive, though the absolute truth of that remains debated.
Regardless of how he got the bodies, what he learned from looking inside them completely rewrote medical science.
He was the first physician to truly understand the brain. Before Herophilus, heavily influenced by Aristotle, many believed the heart was the seat of intelligence. Herophilus dissected the brain, mapped the nervous system, and correctly identified the brain as the controlling center of the body.
Wow.
He went further, distinguishing between sensory nerves, which feel pain or heat, and motor nerves, which control muscle movement.
He also mapped the cardiovascular system, right? He figured out the difference between veins and arteries, which look pretty similar to the naked eye.
The prevailing medical theory of the time was that veins carried blood, but arteries carried pneuma air, or a vital spirit. Herophilus observed that arteries had significantly thicker walls than veins, and by carefully studying the pulse, he realized that arteries were actively pumping blood from the heart.
That's brilliant.
He even designed a specialized water clock to accurately measure the pulse rate of his patients, diagnosing fevers based on heart rhythms. He completely demystified the female reproductive system as well, mapping the ovaries and writing a comprehensive manual specifically designed to aid midwives in safe childbirth.
It's just astonishing. And we can't forget scholars like Seleucus, who theorized a heliocentric universe, arguing that the Earth rotates on its axis and revolves around the sun, and accurately explained that the tides were caused by the gravitational pull of the moon. Or Ctesibius, who essentially invented the science of pneumatics and created the hydraulis, a massive pipe organ powered by complex water pressure mechanisms. The sheer density of innovation happening in this one city is staggering.
It was an unparalleled concentration of genius. And while we celebrate these incredible scientific achievements, we also have to acknowledge the profound cultural and literary losses that occurred when the library eventually faded.
What specifically do we know we lost?
We lost the complete epic cycle. These were the sweeping, foundational poems that told the entire exhaustive story of the Trojan War and its aftermath, of which Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are only a small surviving fraction.
Oh, that's a huge loss.
We lost the works of the early sophist philosophers like Protagoras, who dared to write openly about agnosticism and the relativity of truth. We lost the foundational, extensive texts of Stoicism written by Chrysippus.
Wait, Chrysippus? Is he the philosopher who famously died laughing?
He is indeed. Chrysippus was an incredibly prolific writer, supposedly authoring over 160 texts on logic, ethics, and physics. The legend of his death is that he was sitting in his garden when he saw a donkey eating his prized figs.
Okay.
He found this mildly amusing and told his slave to give the donkey some unmixed, highly potent wine to wash the figs down. When the donkey actually drank the wine and started stumbling around drunk, Chrysippus found the situation so overwhelmingly hilarious that he collapsed in a fit of laughter, suffered a cardiac event, and died.
We only have tiny, scattered fragments of his massive body of work left today.
What a way to go. But this entire discussion brings me to the question that kept me up at night while prepping for this deep dive. I need you to help me reconcile this.
I can try. What's the contradiction?
If they had a working steam engine and they were mapping the nervous system and they were building complex automated machines with pneumatics and gears and they understood planetary motion, why wasn't there an ancient industrial revolution?
Did the loss of the library prevent us from having a steampunk Roman Empire? Did we lose 1,000 years of progress and flying cars? Because these books eventually rotted away.
This is perhaps the most important question we can ask, and it requires us to challenge another deeply held popular assumption. The short answer is no. The loss of the library did not delay flying cars or steam trains. And the reason comes down to the fundamental cultural mindset and socioeconomic structure of the ancient Greco-Roman world.
Unpack that for me, because if you have the blueprint for a steam engine, why wouldn't you hook it up to a loom or a cart or a pump in a mine?
Because the society lacked the economic incentive and the cultural desire to do so. Greek intellectual culture, particularly among the elite class that populated the Mouseion, fiercely prioritized theoretical knowledge over practical, physical application.
So they looked down on actually building things.
Exactly. There was a deep-seated aristocratic disdain for manual labor. The Greeks actually had a derogatory word for it, the nossos, meaning mechanical or artisanal work, which they viewed as vulgar and beneath a true philosopher.
So to them, the highest form of human pursuit was pure thought, pure philosophy, pure geometry in the mind, untainted by dirty hands.
Exactly. Plato famously argued that astronomy should be treated precisely like geometry as a pure, abstract mathematical exercise, and that true philosophers should essentially ignore the actual physical sky because the physical world is an imperfect reflection of perfect forms.
That is wild. So how did they view Heron's steam engine? If they didn't see it as a tool, what was it?
They viewed it as a toy, a novelty, a clever parlor trick to impress wealthy guests at a banquet, or an illusion to create magic in a temple, like temple doors that magically opened when a fire was lit on the altar.
Right, which used the expansion of heated air to push water into buckets that operated a pulley system to swing the heavy doors.
Right, they had the underlying technology, but they had absolutely no industrial policy to scale it up.
And economically, they didn't need labor-saving devices?
That is the darkest, most crucial factor. Why would you invest massive amounts of capital and engineering resources to build complex machines to do manual labor when your entire economy is heavily dependent on a massive, easily exploitable enslaved population?
Wow, yeah.
Human labor was cheap and abundant. The socio-economic foundation for an industrial revolution simply did not exist. The intellectual leaps were brilliant, but they were kept carefully isolated in the realm of theory and elite amusement.
So the tragedy isn't that we lost the mechanical blueprints for an ancient locomotive.
No, the greatest true loss wasn't a specific machine. The most devastating loss from the slow death of Alexandria was the loss of the scientific method itself.
The combination of theory and testing.
Exactly. The Hellenistic period in Alexandria was entirely unique because, for a brief window of a few centuries, the scholars at the Mouseion were actively combining theoretical abstract deduction with rigorous physical experimentation.
Right, like Herophilus physically cutting open a nervous system, or Eratosthenes physically measuring a shadow in the dirt to prove a geometric theorem.
Precisely. They were testing hypotheses against the physical world. When the institution collapsed, starting with Ptolemy VIII's Purge, that empirical framework vanished.
It just went away.
For over a millennium afterward, subsequent scholars in Europe relied heavily on appealing to ancient authority and theoretical logic, rather than observation and physical testing. They would read Aristotle's theories on anatomy and accept them as absolute truth, without ever dissecting a body to verify it. The real scientific tragedy of Alexandria's fall was the severing of theory from experiment.
Wow. Okay, so if the Golden Age effectively ended in 145 BCE, when Ptolemy VIII kicked everyone out, what happened to all that incredible knowledge? Because obviously we know about Eratosthenes, we know about Heron, we know the 103,049 Schroeder number. How did we get this information today if the library starved to death and the physical scrolls eventually rotted away?
This brings us to the profound silver lining of 145 BCE. Ptolemy VIII's vicious expulsion of the scholars felt like an absolute catastrophe at the time. But historically, looking back, it was a profound blessing in disguise.
How so?
By forcing the greatest minds of Alexandria to flee for their lives, he unintentionally created a massive diaspora of ideas.
It's like blowing on a mature dandelion. You destroy the single flower, but you scatter the seeds everywhere.
That is a perfect metaphor. These banished scholars, scattered across the Mediterranean, they went to the intellectual centers of Rhodes, to Athens, to Rome, to the rival city of Pergamon. And they didn't flee empty-handed.
They took their work with them.
They took their knowledge, they took their rigorous research methodologies, and crucially, they packed up and took their personal copies of standardized texts. As one ancient historian beautifully put it, the expulsion from Alexandria meant that these scholars became teachers to the Greek and barbarian alike.
So if I'm understanding the mechanics of this, by being a petty, paranoid tyrant and forcing everyone out of the city, Ptolemy VIII essentially backed up the hard drive of human knowledge across the entire ancient world.
That is exactly what happened. He decentralized the data. The resiliency of ancient texts is a fascinating subject. We tend to think that keeping all the books in one heavily guarded fortress makes them safe.
Yeah, that's the intuitive thought.
But books in the ancient world survived precisely because they weren't kept in just one place. The ruthless, maniacal copying system of the early Ptolemies confiscating books, copying them, sending the copies back out into the world, meant that private libraries, distant monastic collections in rival cities held high-quality duplicates of the greatest works.
And who are the people keeping this backup drive alive over the next 1,000 years? Because this is where the historical irony of the Hollywood myths really hits hard. The very people who are usually blamed in popular culture for burning the library were actually the ones who painstakingly saved its contents.
It is one of history's great ironies. The preservation of classical knowledge was carried out by the very religious and cultural groups, often scapegoated for its destruction. For centuries after the fall of Rome, Christian copyists and scribes in Byzantine monasteries labored endlessly, working in freezing scriptoriums to meticulously reproduce Greek and Latin manuscripts by hand.
Oh.
They didn't burn the texts. They are the primary reason so much classical literature survived into the modern era.
And what about the science and the philosophy?
That brings us to the Islamic Golden Age. Remember the myth about Caliph Omar burning the books in the bathhouses?
Yeah.
The truth is the exact opposite. Islamic centers of learning, in places like Baghdad with the famed House of Wisdom, and later in Cordoba in Spain, displayed a voracious, insatiable appetite for Greek philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine.
This was the translation movement, right, where they were actively hunting down these texts.
Yes. From the 8th to the 10th centuries, Muslim scholars actively sought out ancient texts by Aristotle, Euclid, Ptolemy, and Galen. They didn't just passively store them, they translated them into Arabic, they wrote extensive commentaries debating the ideas, and they expanded upon the math and the science.
So they were actively using the data.
Exactly. Without this massive, well-funded translation movement, a huge percentage of the Hellenistic scientific heritage would have been irrevocably lost to time. The knowledge survived because it was deeply valued by multiple, distinct cultures over thousands of years.
Which really brings us to the core thesis of this whole deep dive. We have this pervasive idea of a library as a vault, a stone fortress where you lock up the knowledge behind heavy doors to keep it safe from the chaos of the world. But the physical reality of the ancient world makes that strategy completely impossible. We're talking about papyrus.
We really have to understand the mechanics of papyrus. It is incredibly fragile. It is made of dried river reeds pressed together. It is highly susceptible to humidity, to mold, to ambient moisture, to fire, and to an endless variety of hungry insects.
It's basically bug food.
Exactly. A papyrus scroll left untouched on a dark shelf in Alexandria wouldn't survive 1,000 years. Even in a perfect, climate-controlled environment. It naturally chemically rots, it breaks down into dust.
So a text didn't survive because it was locked behind a heavy door and forgotten about. It survived because someone, somewhere, thought it was valuable enough to pull it off the shelf, unroll it, and painstakingly copy it by hand, letter by letter, onto a fresh piece of papyrus or parchment.
Yes.
And then 100 years later, someone else had to do the exact same thing, generation after generation.
That is the secret to historical survival. Knowledge is not a physical object that can be permanently hoarded. It is a living, breathing process. The decline of the Library of Alexandria proves that a centralized repository is actually a massive point of vulnerability.
It's a single point of failure.
Right. The library failed not when a fire broke out, but when it ceased to be a living center of learning and became a rigid political pawn. When Ptolemy VIII decided that political loyalty was more important than intellectual inquiry, the institution died that very day, even if the physical scrolls remained sitting on the shelves, slowly rotting for another 300 years.
It makes me think of knowledge like a living language. If you have the greatest, most comprehensive dictionary in the world, and you lock it in a bulletproof glass case, but absolutely nobody is speaking those words out loud in the streets, the language is dead.
That's right.
The dictionary is just a tombstone. Knowledge only lives when it's moving, when it's being taught, when it's being debated, and when it's being actively copied.
That is a beautiful analogy, and it leads to a much deeper philosophical reflection on what truly destroys a civilization's intellectual heritage. It is rarely the sudden strike of a barbarian sword or the dramatic toss of a torch. The true enemy of learning is apathy.
Apathy and defunding.
Yes. It is petty political intrigue. It is a shifting societal zeitgeist that collectively decides funding a military campaign or a gladiator game is more vital than funding a research institute. It happens when a society decides that intellectual debate and critical thinking are too dangerous to the ruling class, and so the scholars are pushed out.
It's the slow, quiet closing of doors, the non-renewal of grants, the security guard put in charge of the think tank.
There's a remarkably powerful quote by the 18th century historian Edward Gibbon that perfectly captures this sentiment. When reflecting on the lost libraries of antiquity and the sheer amount of history that has vanished, he wrote, "When I seriously compute the lapse of ages, the waste of ignorance, and the calamities of war, our ruins rather than our losses are the object of my surprise."
Our ruins rather than our losses are the object of my surprise. That is heavy. He's essentially saying we shouldn't be crying over what turned to ash. We should be absolutely astounded that anything managed to survive at all.
He is asking us to reframe our perspective. We should celebrate the sheer volume of human brilliance that managed to run the brutal, relentless gauntlet of history. Think about the wars, the floods, the fires, the insects, the indifferent rulers, the purges.
It's a miracle anything made it.
The fact that the Schroeder number, or the circumference of the earth, or the plays of Sophocles made it into our hands today is a miracle of human stubbornness.
That's a really beautiful sentiment. I love the optimism of it. But I have to play devil's advocate and push back a little here. Doesn't that perspective sort of let those negligent historical leaders off the hook?
How do you mean?
Well, if we just shrug and accept that things naturally decay and empires inevitably fall, do we lose the urgency to protect our own institutions today? If we say, well, the truly important stuff gets copied by monks eventually anyway, aren't we giving a massive free pass to the politicians who are cutting public library budgets right now?
That is a very sharp critique, and it's a crucial distinction we have to make. Gibbon's perspective offers historical comfort, but you are absolutely right that it should not breed contemporary complacency. Understanding that knowledge requires continuous, exhausting, active preservation is exactly why we cannot let our leaders or ourselves off the hook.
The survival of texts wasn't an accident of nature.
Not at all. It was the result of deliberate, back-breaking effort by scribes and scholars who were often drastically underfunded, unappreciated, and sometimes actively persecuted in their own time. The ultimate lesson of Alexandria isn't that decay is fine and natural. The lesson is that relying on a single patron, a single government, or a single institution to protect our heritage is profoundly dangerous.
And that danger feels incredibly urgently relevant right now. I want to draw a modern parallel here, because this isn't just about ancient history. We moved from fragile papyrus to durable parchment, from parchment to the mass production of the printing press, and now we're fully entrenched in the digital age.
From papyrus to pixels.
Today, we have something like 350,000 public libraries globally. We have the entirety of human knowledge accessible on the glass rectangles in our pockets. We feel invincible. We feel like the Library of Alexandria could never happen to us. But are digital archives truly more permanent than those ancient scrolls?
In many structural ways, they're actually far more fragile. We suffer from a massive illusion of permanence because digital data feels immaterial. We call it the cloud, which sounds ethereal and indestructible, but the cloud is just someone else's computer.
It's physical hardware.
It is physical hardware that requires intense maintenance. Furthermore, digital formats become obsolete at a terrifying, accelerating rate. Try opening a proprietary word processing file saved on a floppy disk from 1995.
You can't do it.
If you don't have the specific legacy hardware and the specific software to decode the ones and zeros, that text is entirely lost to you, just as surely as if it had burned.
It's unreadable metadata.
Beyond software obsolescence, consider the physical infrastructure. The server farms that host our internet require massive, continuous amounts of electricity to run and massive amounts of water and power to cool. They require incredibly expensive physical maintenance.
They require massive, wealthy patrons, just like the Mouseion required the Ptolemies.
Exactly. The internet requires constant, uninterrupted economic patronage. Currently, the patrons of our era are a handful of massive tech companies. They host exabities of human history, culture, scientific research, and daily communication.
So here is my terrifying question, the one that really brings us all full circle. If our society's priorities shift, or if those massive tech companies experience a severe economic downturn and decide it is no longer profitable to host this data, could we experience a digital 145 BCE? Are we one major corporate budget cut, one board of directors meeting away from losing massive swaths of our own history?
It is a genuine, pressing concern among digital archivists and librarians today. We call it link rot, or digital decay. If a company goes bankrupt or is bought out or simply changes its business model to optimize profits, millions of images, articles, historical records, and personal histories can vanish overnight.
Just poof, gone.
There is no physical copy left behind in a ruined building for future archaeologists to dig up. There's no ash to mourn. It is simply wiped from a hard drive, and the server space is rented to the highest bidder.
That is deeply unsettling.
We are deeply vulnerable if we don't actively prioritize the public, decentralized preservation of our digital heritage. We cannot blindly assume that modern tech billionaires will be fundamentally better, more benevolent stewards of global knowledge than the Ptolemaic kings were.
Wow, that completely reframes how I look at a 404 era page on a website. It's not just a broken link or a temporary glitch, it's a tiny digital library burning down in real time.
It is a loss of memory, which is why the ultimate lesson of Alexandria isn't about architecture or stone walls or fire suppression systems. It leaves us with a lingering, provocative thought that challenges everything we assume about preservation. The only true way to protect knowledge is to ensure it isn't hoarded.
Right.
It cannot be locked away behind paywalls or guarded by a single corporate or royal entity. It must be shared as widely, as freely, and as redundantly as possible. A book or a data file that is read by thousands, translated, copied, and dispersed across the globe is virtually immortal. A book hidden in a fortress guarded by a king is already ash.
A book hidden in a fortress is already ash. I can't think of a better, more powerful place to leave it. We started this journey standing on the shores of the Mediterranean, smelling the smoke of a Hollywood myth. We wanted a clear villain with a torch. But I think the reality we uncovered is so much more compelling and so much more demanding of us today. It's a complex story of human brilliance, of staggering scientific leaps, of petty politics, the fragility of memory, and the incredible, stubborn resilience of the written word. If you want to keep exploring these hidden depths of history, to keep challenging the comforting myths we've all been taught, you're exactly where you belong. Make sure to follow and subscribe, and join us for the next leg of this intellectual journey. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.